On today's show, justice is finally served for Rudy Giuliani after the judge in his $148 million defamation case orders him to give up all his worldly possessions by next week or face prison time. More on that later in the show, and if there's time, I'll explain why some polls are disturbing and misleading. November 5th is now only 11 days away with more than 20 million votes already cast. During a town hall meeting on Wednesday in front of a group of Georgia Christians, Donald Trump continued to lie, accusing FEMA of diverting hurricane relief funds to migrants. Earlier in the week, speaking before a group called Believers in Ballots in Concord, North Carolina, Donald Trump was mistaken for Jesus by this group of devout Christians.
In our movement, we love Christians, we welcome believers, and we embrace followers of Jesus. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
They're chanting Jesus, 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 and he says, thank you very much. These are very smart people, very smart people. Eileen Cannon, the Trump-appointed judge who threw out the entire classified documents case against the former president over the summer, has reportedly been promised a job as his next attorney general if he wins in November. According to reporting by ABC News, a memo written by Trump's transition team has placed her on a short list to head the Justice Department. Judge Cannon is generally considered an inexperienced intellectual lightweight. Special counsel Jack Smith is appealing her decision to toss the case out, a case many consider a slam dunk for the Justice Department. Bill Gates quietly announced that he has donated $50 million to a super PAC that supports Kamala Harris. Gates has not officially endorsed Harris, but has said privately he fears a second Trump administration, probably because Trump and Bill Barr kept the Jeffrey Epstein tapes. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, is also reportedly supporting Harris. According to The Guardian, Dimon is keeping his support secret for fear of retaliation from Trump. Dimon is one of the bankers who crashed the economy back in 2008 and is now destroying the planet Earth as J.P. Morgan Chase continues to be the single biggest investor in fossil fuels. CNBC reports that Donald Trump's proposed 20% tariffs on foreign imports would end up costing American consumers $4 trillion a year.
The Conservative American Enterprise Institute, took pen to paper, says the tariffs proposed by former President Trump, 20% on all imports to the U.S. would cost Americans as much as $3.9 trillion. Kyle Pomerlew, senior fellow at AEI, says that would amount to one of the biggest tax hikes since at least the 1980s. He tells me it would be like any other tax increase. It will have a negative impact on growth and employment and also hurt U.S. exporters primarily through retaliatory tariffs. President Trump has said that the tariffs are paid by foreign companies and would boost U.S. growth by bringing manufacturing to the U.S. Most economists from the right and the left tend to disagree with him. In fact, conservative economists who find other parts of the Trump agenda, like tax cuts, will boost growth, say tariffs could nearly offset all those pro-growth policies. A paper by the conservative Cato Institute says such aggressive protectionism would be extremely damaging to the economy and broader foreign policy goals. Now, what's interesting about this is Trump would have almost unilateral authority to enact these tariffs. All he would have to do is declare a national emergency. Congress would need a veto-proof majority to end them after a year. courts would be reluctant to overrule the president. Now, it remains to be seen. Some Trump surrogates have come on our air and said that tariffs are a negotiating tactic, would only hit those places that have unfair tariffs. But the former president has talked about them as absolute policy, and his other economic programs look like they're counting on the revenue from tariffs. So they look like they're, at least that's what he's planning, regardless of what his surrogates may be saying.
Conservative think tanks are saying the tariff scheme is apocalyptic. On my next show, I'll talk about the 137 statutory powers at a president's disposal after he declares a national emergency. This reporter was just talking about the powers that a president has to declare a national emergency. Some of these powers are granted to a president without congressional approval. According to a new study by the Washington Post, nearly half of all Republican candidates are already saying the 2024 election is rigged. 1/3 of these election deniers running for office, most of whom are incumbents, are spreading the lie that undocumented migrants are casting ballots for Harris. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, Republican, announced Wednesday there's almost zero evidence of undocumented migrants voting in Georgia's elections, which is now seeing the largest turnout in history. According to an audit, he said, of more than 8 million Georgia voters going back more than a decade, only 9 non-citizens ever tried to vote. The audit shows most of those 9 non-citizens cast ballots before 2012. Raffensperger said with the passage of new voter ID laws, it is now completely impossible for non-citizens to vote. You might remember Donald Trump called Raffensperger in the lead up to January 6th, ordering him to find 11,780 votes. Trump famously and illegally said, I only need 11,000 votes, fellas. I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break. Well, they didn't give him a break, and he's now facing charges in that RICO trial down in Fulton County. According to the Washington Post, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene continues to accuse Dominion machines of switching Trump votes to Harris votes in Georgia's Whitfield County. But local election officials determined the machines were working just fine, and it was voter error. Trump voters who couldn't figure out how a simple ballot works, which is odd because his supporters always come across as the picture of sophistication. Well, this is interesting. A new A+ Emerson poll shows the race between Senator Ted Cruz and his Democratic challenger, Congressman Colin Allred, is pretty much tied, with Cruz leading Allred by just 1 point, well within the margin of error. That same poll last month showed Cruz leading Allred by 4 points, suggesting the ground might be shifting in Texas, a state Trump carried in 2020 by 6 points. Polling averages right now show him beating Harris by about the same number. But there is somewhat, I'm going to say, huge news. Kamala Harris will be campaigning in Houston, Texas on Friday. She has been stuck fighting it out in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, with occasional visits to Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. Does she believe Texas is in play? What polls is she looking at? The Harris campaign is downplaying her visit, insisting she is going down there to draw attention to Texas's draconian abortion laws, which are among the cruelest in the country. Harris is running the smartest, most meticulous campaign in recent memory. She doesn't make a move unless she's run it through her political machine. For her to take time off from Pennsylvania suggests she's seeing things in both Pennsylvania and Texas that we're not seeing. She's seeing good news. If there's time on today's show, I'll explain the polling averages. But right now, the Washington Post polling averages, which These averages are the most stringent out there. The Washington Post is very selective about which polling units they allow into their averages. Right now, the Washington Post polling averages show Harris winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by 2 percentage points. That is a blowout. These are the averages of only state-of-the-art A-plus pollsters. If there's time later on today's show, I will explain how there's been an explosion of right-wing partisan polling units that are attempting to contaminate the polling averages and create the illusion that Donald Trump is doing better than he actually is. In order to claim voter fraud, Trump needs right-wing pollsters showing support for him where there is none. Am I concerned about November 5th? Absolutely. But remember, polls do not reflect the ground game, which in key battleground states can make the difference between 1 to 3 percentage points. Elon Musk is in charge of Trump's ground game, and it's a disaster. Trump, meanwhile, is canceling events all over the country. The excuse he gives is the schedule is just packed. He doesn't have time. Sometimes his campaign will let slip that Trump is tired and needs to rest. But the real reason Trump is canceling these events, the real reason is he cannot fill the rooms. Paul Friedman, a federal judge in Washington, D.C., ordered the Pentagon to release all pertinent information regarding Donald Trump's August visit to Arlington Cemetery. A female cemetery worker said she was physically assaulted by Trump's entourage that day when she tried to stop them from using this sacred burial ground as a photo op. Trump staged the event to mark the third anniversary of Biden pulling us out of Afghanistan, which Republicans insist was botched. It was anything but botched. Anytime you pull out after losing a 20-year war, it's not going to be pretty. Arlington expressly forbids using the cemetery for political purposes, especially photo ops. After being shoved by Trump's campaign staff, that female cemetery worker called the police, and the New York Times reported the woman refused to press charges for fear, she said, of retribution by Trump supporters. American Oversight, a government watchdog, filed a request through the Freedom of Information Act for the police report, which the Pentagon will be releasing on Friday. Be interesting to read. It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Those are the words of Donald Trump back in 2020 after he was told what it would cost after he publicly promised to pay the funeral costs of an American soldier who had been murdered here in America. Trump, as president, invited the family of the soldier to the Oval Office and publicly promised to pay for their daughter's funeral. But according to new reporting in the Atlantic magazine, Trump was later told that it would cost him $60 grand, and he turned to his White House chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and shouted, quote, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a effing Mexican. Don't pay it." According to the Atlantic magazine, Trump wouldn't let this go, and later in the day fumed to unnamed staffers saying, quote, "Can you believe it? Effing people trying to rip me off." Yeah, who do they think they are? Donald Trump? There's been sensational fallout after General Mark Kelly strongly worded comments to the New York Times earlier this week where he clearly stated Donald Trump is in fact a fascist. General Kelly first served as Trump's director of Homeland Security and then became his longest-serving White House chief of staff. He has remained relatively quiet since then, and so his words have much greater currency, especially now in the lead-up to Election Day. This immediately on the heels of former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Trump administration, General Mark Milley, calling Donald Trump, quote, "a fascist to the core." General Milley told Bob Woodward he has no doubt that if Trump returns to the Oval Office, Trump will have him court-martialed and arrested. There has never been anything like this in modern American politics, where it is now commonplace for one of the two leading candidates for president to be called a fascist. President Biden's White House press secretary confirmed on Wednesday that, yes, President Biden believes Donald Trump is a fascist. Kamala Harris warned Wednesday that Donald Trump wants, quote unquote, unchecked power. Picking up on General Kelly's comments to the New York Times, Harris said on Wednesday, Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable, and in a second term, people like General John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. She continued, those who once tried to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses would no longer be there and no longer be there to rein him in. That's what Project 2025 is all about, to make sure that he's only surrounded by loyalists. Mark Esper, who served as Donald Trump's defense secretary from 2019 to 2020, said yesterday his former boss, by definition of the word, is a fascist. One thing the American people can never say is they were never warned. We all saw January 6th. Donald Trump, throughout this campaign, has reminded us exactly who he is and what he plans on doing. Those are my words, by the way, not Mark Esper's. He just called Trump a fascist. General Mark Kelly, after remaining relatively silent for the past 4 years, agreed to 3 separate interviews with the New York Times to discuss his fear for a second Trump administration. According to the New York Times, General Kelly said Trump meets the definition of the word fascist. Kelly said, quote, well, looking at the definition of fascism, it's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, and belief in a natural social hierarchy. He went on to say, certainly the former president is in the far-right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist for sure, unquote. General Kelly went on to say, Trump certainly prefers the dictator approach to government. General Kelly continued, Mr. Trump never accepted the fact that he wasn't the most powerful man in the world. And by power, I mean an ability to do anything he wanted, anytime he wanted. He's certainly the only president that has all but rejected what America is all about and what makes America America in terms of our Constitution, in terms of our values, the way we look at everything, to include family and government. He's certainly the only president I know of, certainly in my lifetime, that was like that. General Kelly said Trump didn't want to be seen with injured war veterans. Trump, he said, had a particular disdain for amputees, telling Kelly, quote, it's not a good look for me. Unbelievable. General Kelly reiterated the words of from his interview with the Atlantic magazine, where he called soldiers who were wounded or died in battle losers and suckers. Kelly said Trump had zero respect for the U.S. Constitution and had no idea that he had sworn an oath to protect it. Last year, during his farewell address after serving 4 years as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley made a not-so-veiled reference to Donald Trump when he reminded everyone that one of the things that makes America special is our soldiers, our military leaders, and our government officials swear an oath of loyalty to our Constitution, not an oath of loyalty to a king, a queen, or a dictator. That is a concept, according to General Mark Kelly, that Donald Trump is incapable of understanding. You're listening to the Mop-Up for October 24th, 2023. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And the best way to help me The best way to help grow this community is by sharing this episode with your friends. Please forward the link to this episode in an email, a text message, or on social media, and let me know in the comments section if you did. I read all your comments. If I get something wrong, please correct me. I think it's obvious I read your comments. It'd be obvious, especially if you watched the previous show. I want to apologize to some of my listeners who have successfully gotten under my skin by constantly telling me to ignore the polls. I kind of snapped on the last show and called these listeners stupid for writing that, and I apologize. They're not stupid. Brain-dead imbeciles, but not stupid. No, I understand why people say ignore the polls, but people who say that are not paying attention to the important polls. And this entire country runs on market research and polling. So polls are important. Good polls are important. I shouldn't have snapped, but I get a little angry. We're all a little tense now. Now, look, there would be Medicare for all in America right now if it polled better than it does. So my suggestion to listeners is pay attention to the good A-plus polls because the people in charge are paying attention to them. And if you want something like reproductive freedom, same-sex marriage, passage of the PRO Act, and Medicare for all, you better learn how to move the polls. When the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage more than a decade ago, one of the reasons cited in the decision was polling. Polling showed that the American people are now more accepting of same-sex marriage than they ever were before. So instead of sitting on your ass complaining that the Democrats have given up on Medicare for all, make them do it. And the way you make them do it is move the polls. If you can't move the polls, you can't move your government officials. If there's time, I'll have some interesting information about the polls later on in this show. Please check out shopdavidfeldman.com and pick up my worst case scenario mug. It'll calm you down, especially if you put Jameson in your coffee. We have our Halloween collection. This is a souvenir from the 2029 inaugural ball. And Donald Trump as a predator. Pick up a MAGA cap for your MAGA moron friends who can't read so they won't notice. It says low IQ individual on the back of the hat. I love this. It's Donald Trump and Edvard Munch's The Scream. And this, Uncle Scam. It's a beautiful cup. Uncle Scam. And if you want to break my heart, pick up the I Hope You're in the Mood for Diarrhea. Chef's Apron, my biggest seller. Appearing in Nevada, J.D. Vance picked up on Donald Trump's lie that Kamala Harris never worked at McDonald's when she attended college in the 1980s. Or he could have really appealed to the working class voters by promising to raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour, but that would actually help people. So just lie and say Kamala Harris never had a day job. During her appearance last night on CNN, Kamala Harris told Anderson Cooper, yes, Donald Trump is a fascist.
He pulled me into him and started groping me. He put his hands all over my breasts, my waist, my butt, and I froze. And I froze because I was so deeply confused about what was happening because the hands were moving all over me. Yet these two men were like smiling at one another and continuing on in their conversation.
That is former model Stacey Williams telling The Guardian yesterday that she was sexually assaulted by Donald Trump in front of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein back in 1993 during a Christmas party at Trump Tower. Stacey Williams said Epstein brought her to the party to meet Donald Trump. After Trump assaulted her, she and Epstein immediately left. And according to Stacey Williams, Epstein, who was laughing and smiling while Trump assaulted her, suddenly grew angry on their way out. She told The Guardian, quote, "Jeffrey and I left and he didn't look at me or speak to me, and I felt this seething rage around me. And when we got down to the sidewalk, he looked at me and just berated me and said, quote, 'Why did you let him do that to you?' She told The Guardian she has since come to realize Epstein was playing a sick mind game with her." The Guardian also reports that back in 2002, Trump told New York Magazine, quote, "I've known Jeffrey Epstein, for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with." Trump added, "It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." And here's the former First Lady Melania standing in the middle between Epstein and her then boyfriend, Donald Trump. And here's Melania posing for British GQ in front of Donald's private jet back in 2000. She's holding a gun. Even back then, she was a strong supporter of our Second Amendment. Very tasteful, classy, and elegant. On Sunday, Donald Trump made French fries and served burgers at a local McDonald's in Pennsylvania. The next day, CNBC reported that shares in McDonald's fell after the CDC reported an outbreak of E. coli linked to Quarter Pounders. The outbreak killed one person and made 49 others sick because everyone and everything he touches turns to crap. But don't take my word for it. Ask Rudy Giuliani.
You want to stop me?
Yeah, we want to stop you. Yeah, we want to stop you. In the past 4 years, Rudy Giuliani has lost his law licenses in New York and Washington, D.C. He's been indicted in Georgia and Arizona on charges of trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And he lost his radio show on WABC here in New York, his chief source of income, after he refused to stop spewing lies about the 2020 election. And now we're coming to the end. It's the end of the line for Rudy Giuliani. 80-year-old Rudy Giuliani has run out of options. Giuliani has just been ordered to give his $6 million New York apartment next week to the mother-daughter Georgia election workers he defamed immediately following the 2020 election. But that hardly makes a dent in the $148 million he owes Ruby Friedman and Shay Moss, who sued him for defamation after he repeatedly and falsely accused them on television and in the Georgia state legislature of stuffing ballots for Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Because of Rudy Giuliani's lies, these two women had to go into hiding as they were inundated with death threats, with pro-Trump election vigilantes pounding on their door, threatening to kill them. At least one person attempted to break into their home and make a citizen's arrest. While Giuliani was spreading lies about them, the FBI told both women it was no longer safe to be in their homes and they needed to go into hiding. Fearing for her life, the daughter said she lost her job, gained 70 pounds, and was afraid to go outside as her phone was constantly targeted with racially tinged death threats. Giuliani defaulted on that defamation suit, failing to turn over any evidence during the discovery phase of the trial. After defaulting, a jury then ordered Giuliani to pay the women $148 million. Giuliani immediately declared bankruptcy. Giuliani refused to cooperate with the bankruptcy judge, failing to turn over documents. He was accused of hiding assets from creditors. He also refused to pay his attorneys and his forensic accountants, who are also suing him. Judge Louis J. Lyman, a federal district court in Manhattan, told Giuliani this week, "If you don't comply with my order and turn over all your worldly possessions by next week, I will put you in prison." Topping the list of Rudy's worldly possessions is Rudy's multi-million-dollar apartment in New York. He's got to unload it by next week. For the time being, Rudy will be able to keep his condo in Florida. Giuliani says Giuliani also has to turn over a 1980 Mercedes, once owned by the actress Lauren Bacall. He also has to give up all his television sets, his furniture, his beloved sports memorabilia, and 26 watches, including one given to him by his grandfather. Who has 26 watches? There are some World Series rings that Rudy's idiot son claims his dad gave to him as a gift, but there are also accusations that Rudy has been secretly giving his idiot son various assets to hide from the creditors. Because Rudy can't afford lawyers, justice is being meted out rather quickly. Judge Lyman, who is threatening to lock Rudy up unless he hands over his possessions next week, was appointed by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who still owes Rudy $2 million for the work Rudy did uncovering voter fraud in the 2020 election, or should I say failing to uncover voter fraud. If Trump ever gets around to paying Rudy that $2 million he owes him, that $2 million will go directly to the Georgia election workers. Immediately after losing the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump set up the Save America PAC, which raised hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from small idiot donors who were led to believe that money was going to be spent investigating voter fraud. But not a single penny of that money ever went to any of the lawyers who Trump supposedly hired to prove voter fraud. It took several years until Trump finally reimbursed Giuliani for the expenses Rudy incurred traveling around the country going before judges and state legislatures in the lead up to January 6. Now, let's be honest, Rudy doesn't deserve to be paid. He lost 60 court cases and failed to convince Republican-controlled legislatures in Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania that there was any evidence of voter fraud. He doesn't deserve a penny. In fact, when the Republican Speaker of the Arizona State House, Rusty Bowers, or any of the judges asked for evidence of voter fraud, all Rudy could ever muster was, quote, "We've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence." We've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. It was the perfect confluence of arrogance, alcohol poisoning, and insanity. That is what Rudy said in the courtroom or when he was testifying during official proceedings before state legislatures. We got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. Rudy knew not to lie before the judges or while testifying before state legislatures. When pressed before a judge or before a state legislature, he would say, "We got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence." And then immediately after saying that in a court appearance or during his testimony, he would bolt out, step outside in front of a bank of microphones and tell reporters, "I've uncovered overwhelming evidence of voter fraud and we will prevail." Rudy said one thing to the judges, one thing before the state legislatures, and another thing to reporters, or when he appeared on Fox News or Newsmax. Like Trump, Rudy lies with abandon to the American people, thinking there'll be no consequences. Rudy, a former prosecutor, was convinced that just like Donald Trump, freedom of speech allows him to say whatever he wants so long as he's not testifying under oath or going before a judge. Giuliani tried to pull the same exact crap during the defamation trial. Inside the courtroom, he admitted to making false statements about the two election workers. Giuliani admitted before the judge that none of what he said about them was true, while his lawyers insisted the punishment should match the crime. Giuliani's attorneys conceded Giuliani made false statements, but he never intended those statements to result in nonstop, racially tinged death threats, forcing these two women to go into hiding. Rudy and his lawyers admitted to the judge Rudy lied. And yes, they admitted he is liable for defamation, but because he didn't intend to hurt the two women, the punitive and compensatory damages should be much lower. Then, immediately after admitting his guilt, after court was adjourned, Rudy would run outside, stand before a bank of microphones, and tell reporters he didn't regret a single word he said about the two women, insisting what I said about them is all true. Like I said, this was the perfect confluence of arrogance, alcohol poisoning, insanity, and stupidity. Rudy figured if Trump could get away with this, so can I. Only minutes after telling the judge he lied and asked for forgiveness and a smaller judgment against him because he didn't intend to destroy the lives of the two election workers, Rudy stood before a bank of microphones telling reporters, when I testify, you'll get the whole story and it will be definitively clear what I said was true. Needless to say, lawyers for the two election workers immediately threatened to sue him for defamation again, and the judge told him to keep his mouth shut. They're going to sue him again for defamation, the same way E. Jean Carroll's attorneys are now thinking about suing Donald Trump for defamation a third time, because he continues to report the very same lies. He continues to repeat the very same lies that prompted a jury to decide Donald Trump must pay E. Jean Carroll $85 million. He's appealing this. See, Rudy can't appeal because he can't pay his lawyers. Donald Trump can tie all of this up in court because he's been raiding the Save America PAC to pay all his legal fees. Oh, and by the way, headline from the Washington Post, July 19th, 2023. Judge clarifies, yes, Trump was found to have raped E. Jean Carroll. Take a screenshot of that. Twice, the judge in that case put into writing that the jury found Donald Trump guilty of rape in common law parlance. Back to Rudy, who was also being sued for rape. Rudy thought he had the game all figured out. I'll tell the truth under oath or before a judge, and then I'll lie before the American people. But what Rudy didn't understand is that accusing Dominion voting machines or Georgia election workers of switching Trump votes to Biden votes, that's defamation. Freedom of speech doesn't protect your right to lie, and in so doing, destroy the reputations of a corporation like Dominion or the two Georgia election workers. But why would Rudy be expected to know that? He was only a federal prosecutor for 2 decades. What was especially loathsome about Giuliani's behavior was his racially charged accusation against the mother-daughter election workers who happened to be black. Giuliani appeared on national television and showed video of the two women exchanging a ginger mint, but Rudy lied, saying they were exchanging a USB drive filled with Biden votes to feed into the tabulation machine. Giuliani then added they were passing that thumb drive around like vials of cocaine or heroin. Trump picked up on this by referring to the two black women as, quote, professional vote scammers and hustlers. Rudy is 80. There are reports of him walking around Mar-a-Lago in a haze, telling anyone that my life is a nightmare. I can't believe what's happening to me. I would have sympathy, I would have empathy if Rudy showed even the slightest sign of remorse. What is especially repugnant about Rudy Giuliani, as well as Trump and his MAGA Republicans, is they say whatever they want and don't care about the consequences. They destroy our lives and our country.
So, let's have trial by combat.
I want justice. I want justice. I want justice. Every day that Rudy Giuliani is suffering is justice for me. Let's talk briefly about the polls. How are we doing on time? Okay. I want to talk about the polls. And I know that these polls are triggering for some of my listeners who just want this to, including me, we want this to be over. I get it. And that's why I kind of got angry on the last show, because I was scared. Angry people are scared people. And, you know, I pore over the polls and I'm convinced Kamala is going to win, but that doesn't mean I'm not scared, which makes me angry. So let's talk briefly about the polls, because it's causing a lot of agita. Reports on Monday of Trump's surge in the polling, that he's cracking Kamala's blue wall, those reports were overstated. And suddenly, people are coming back down to earth as the polling averages now show Harris back in the lead in Michigan. Trump was briefly in the lead in Michigan, according to the New York Times polling averages. So, what's going on with the polling averages? The polling averages are a roundup of supposedly A-plus polls. In the past, they have served as the most accurate determinant of how a presidential election is shaping up, 2016 notwithstanding. We've talked on previous shows about some of these A-plus pollsters overcorrecting for 2016 by relying on a discredited methodology where their sample must now include something like 50% of people who voted for Trump in 2020. And many of these pollsters are using this methodology because they're terrified of missing out on what are called stealth Trump voters. Stealth Trump voters. There's a belief that many Trump voters think it's nobody's business, that they're hateful bigots, and they keep their votes to themselves. They are the stealth Trump voters. There is a growing school of thought right now that these pollsters relying on that methodology are inaccurately skewing the results in Trump's favor and overstating America's appetite for a second Trump administration. The New Republic writes this morning that since 2020, there has been a massive increase in the number of Republican polling operations attempting to flood the polling averages to create the illusion that Republicans are way more popular than they actually are. These newer pollsters are incredibly partisan, right-wing, and incredibly unreliable. They are why so many predicted a massive red wave in the 2022 midterms, a massive red wave that never materialized. Now, if you were reading the right polls and reading the right polling averages, you would have known that the Democrats were going to keep the Senate and Republicans were just barely going to win the House. So, David, you keep saying the polling averages are a reliable snapshot of where the race stands. They are. But polling averages are not all the same way different polls are not the same. Many polling averages have been contaminated by this flood of brand new right-wing partisan pollsters. What you need to look at are the polling averages of A-plus pollsters. Okay, so where does the race stand after all that? I'd like to go into a coma until November 5th. This is why I'm doing this at the end of the show. I know I have some people who are addicted to this stuff. Other people find it incredibly triggering, so I'm going to talk about polls at the end of the show. So where does the race stand? Many of my loved ones are saying, David, I don't know what to believe, and it's creating massive anxiety for me. Okay. The New York Times polling averages of pollsters are not all A+. And the New York Times polling averages shows Harris maintaining a slight lead in the 3 states that comprise the blue wall. Earlier in the week, some of us panicked, not me, at least not publicly. Some of us were concerned because the New York Times polling averages showed Donald Trump taking a partial lead in the blue wall. And it was the first time since Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. Now, the averages, according to the New York Times, have gone back to where they've been all along, with Harris winning the blue wall, but it's incredibly tight. Those are the New York Times polling averages. More importantly, and I think more accurately, the Washington Post's polling averages show Kamala Harris winning the blue wall by a much larger margin. The Washington Post's polling averages show Kamala Harris up by 2 in Pennsylvania, up by 2 in Wisconsin, up by 2 in Michigan. That's a blowout. The Washington Post, their polling averages are way more selective than the New York Times polling averages and only rely on polls that are transparent and use methodology that has a proven track record. So, if you go by the Washington Post polling averages, there's no Trump surge in the blue wall. It's not even close. The problem with the New York Times is it allows way more pollsters into their averages, and so the Times, their averages show it to be a much tighter race. Now look, I'm not saying the Times polling averages have been contaminated by the flood of right-wing bogus pollsters, but I do look at their methodology, and they include way more fringe polling operations than I'm comfortable with. Now, Donald Trump is already claiming voter fraud. These polls are important. They are the guardrails of democracy. When he challenged the results in 2020, his motions were rejected by 60 judges, partly because his claims didn't match the polling. So these polling averages are important. There are polling averages, and then there is the incredibly risky business of forecasting election results. These are 2 separate things. There's the polling averages, and then there are forecast models, like meteorologists trying to tell you what the weather's going to be. Forecast models are based on probabilities, taking into account historical and demographic factors, including but not exclusively polling averages. So it's not just about the polling averages. They take into account fundamentals. For example, to forecast results in a key state like Pennsylvania, forecasters will take into account the state of the economy in Pennsylvania. How many people are working? What's inflation? What's credit card debt looking like? How much has been spent on commercial ad buys by the candidates? And what is the quality of each individual candidate's ground game? As I keep telling you, a good ground game is the difference in a swing state between 1 and 3 points on election day. Election forecasters factor all these elements into their modeling and their prediction for November 5th. Forecasting a model for Pennsylvania would also consider how similar demographics are voting in similar states, and then they would adjust Pennsylvania accordingly. In other words, Indiana and North Carolina are similar demographically, economically. So in forecasting a presidential result in Indiana, they will often look at North Carolina to gain some insight into Indiana voters. This is what forecasting is. It's different from the polling averages. I should not be doing this, but I have obsessive behavior. So I've been looking every day at polls, and I've been paying special attention to the economists' forecasting modeling that they compile every day using data points from YouGov. Since Harris became the presumptive nominee, they have predicted she would win the Electoral College. But in the past week, for the first time since she became the candidate, there has been a shift in the forecast. On October 19th, there was a shift, and Trump became the narrow, likely winner of the Electoral College in a majority of their election simulations. They now show Trump winning the election with 278 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 260. In 100 of their most recent election simulations for Pennsylvania, Donald Trump wins 59 times, Kamala Harris wins 41 times. In the most recent simulations for Wisconsin, Trump wins 54 times, Harris wins 46 times. And in Michigan, Harris wins 51 times, Trump wins 49 times. Okay? This is one of the reasons a lot of people who pay too much attention to this junk are now saying Trump is surging. He's not surging. Okay? The polling averages do not show him winning, but some election forecasts do. Okay? I put this on at the end because it's either mind-numbing or it drives you crazy. And I'll be honest with you, I'm going a little crazy right now. I should not be looking at these. It's a form of control. I keep thinking if I can match the right numbers, she'll win. It's superstition. You know, it's not, but this is who I am. Okay, let me say something about why polls are too accurate and why they are responsible for these races being so tight. People always say, why are these races so tight? They're always so tight. Why are we split so evenly down the middle? Well, it's because of polling. It's because our pulse is constantly being taken, okay? One of the reasons these presidential elections are so tight is due to sophisticated granular polling. Because pollsters are able to drill down on such a granular level, candidates are able to position themselves on issues that hive off voters from the other side without alienating their own base. Donald Trump's race, the positions he takes, they're data-driven. He has tacked to the middle on abortion. Why? Because he knows that will poll better. He polls the evangelicals. He realized where they're going to go, so he can move to the middle on abortion. He has also figured out a way, because he's data-driven, he's figured out a way to steal votes from Kamala Harris by positioning himself as a populist, a phony populist, but a populist, by claiming he'll help the working class with massive tax cuts. These are data-driven decisions. This is stuff that has been polled. He's not just pulling this stuff out of his doughy ass. Because he's data-driven, Trump is promising no taxes on tips. He's promising no taxes on Social Security benefits, no taxes on overtime. And he's going to pay all of this through tariffs, which is essentially a gigantic sales tax. We know it's BS, but it polls well, okay? It doesn't matter if he's telling the truth. It polls well. That's why he's making these promises, because they poll well. He knows that most Americans don't understand what tariffs are. And because of polling, he's learned how to slice off just enough progressive votes from the Democratic Party without alienating hardcore Republicans. Low information progressive Democrats are hearing, oh, he's going to pay for it through tariffs, and he's going to lower my taxes. And they go, okay, I'm going to vote for him instead. He's for the working folk. At the same time, Trump knows, because he's data-driven, that hardcore Republicans are convinced he doesn't mean what he's saying about tariffs. I played that clip from CNBC earlier about the tariffs. Every conservative think tank is saying these 20%, 200% tariffs on all foreign imports would be apocalyptic. But they're still going to vote for Trump because they know he doesn't mean it. Why is he saying it? To hive off low information working class voters from the Democratic Party. Likewise, Kamala Harris is campaigning with Liz Cheney, Republican, for the same reason Donald Trump is promising nobody has to pay taxes on tips, Social Security, or overtime. She's campaigning with Liz Cheney because it polls well. The polls show that bringing Cheney into the fold will hive off just enough Republican voters without alienating hardcore Democrats. This is why the country is so split, because they poll us on such a micro level that they're able to dole out these positions that we're just split right down the middle. If this race is as tight as they say, it's because both candidates are fighting for that middle. And they're polling every word. They're focus grouping every idea, peeling off just enough from the other side by staking out positions that never significantly challenge the status quo. That's why this country is so divided, because everything now is data-driven. And they're dividing us right down the middle. The Republic, it's like, you take these, you take that, and we'll fight for 200,000 votes in 3 battleground states. Which begs the question, how is it possible for Donald Trump to spew authoritarian claptrap, reciting page after page from the Nazi hymnal, and yet find himself in America's political mainstream? Apparently, it polls very well. Fascism polls very well. Otherwise, Trump wouldn't talk this way. On November 5th, we're going to finally discover just how accurate these polling averages and forecasts are. It will be a day of reckoning for the people making millions, taking our collective pulse. But it will also be a day of reckoning for the American people. Now, I know Harris is going to win the popular vote by a significant margin. I know that for a fact. I'm pretty certain she's going to win the blue wall and thereby the Electoral College. I think it might be closer than I want it to be, but she is going to win, mostly because of her superior ground game. But the fact that Donald Trump and his Republican Party are now the status quo, almost equal to the Democratic Party, well, that tells us just how authoritarian, racist, misogynistic, homophobic, and stupid our country is and always has been. We need to do better as a people and as a country. This is an inflection point. It was inevitable. We may lose our Democratic Republican. We may lose our Democratic Republic on November 5th. On Election Day, on November 5th, Americans may discover we deserve to lose it. This racism, this misogyny, this transphobia, this hatred, this authoritarianism, this fascism polls very well. We'll find out just how well on November 5th. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. This has been the Mop-Up for October 24th, 2024. Please share this episode with like-minded people. Thank you to Bob and Mila, who keep the conversation in the chat room civilized. Please leave a comment. I read all your comments. If I got something wrong, let me know. Yeah. Is anybody sleeping? I hope you're all doing well. I can't pretend this is like, I was watching Coach Walsh and Kamala today, and I thought, wow, it would be a tragedy if it would be. What a tragedy. It would be a tragedy not to have them I mean, it's an opportunity for greatness or shit. Yeah. All right. Go to shopdavidfeldman.com. Pick up my worst case scenario mug. I got to do a better job selling this crap. Hey, everybody. Check out my Halloween collection. Isn't this scary? The 2029 inaugural ball souvenir cup or Donald Trump as predator. Yeah. Get a MAGA hat for the MAGA moron who can't read, so they won't know it says low IQ individual on the back. Donald Trump and Edvard Munch's The Scream. And of course, the chef's apron that says, I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea. All right. I'm going to take tomorrow off. I do a show the next day at 2:30 a.m. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you all in 48 hours. 48 hours. Thank you.